Welcome. Welcome to the online class of Professor S.K. Paul, HOD, University Department of English, BRA, Bihar University, Muzaffarpur. Dear students of PhD coursework, today I am going to deliver my lecture on the topic Elizabethan Theater and Drama. Uh, the simple definition of Elizabethan theater and drama is that it is drama written during the reign of Elizabeth I, but that is absurdly simplistic. Elizabethan drama is much more than that. Queen Elizabeth I of England and Ireland reigned from 1558 to 1603. 1603 from 1558 to 1603 during the time when Europeans were starting to break out of the cultural constraints imposed by the medieval church. Great thinkers across Europe were courageously directing their eyes away from the face of God and turning them towards the mind, the form, and the ideas of human beings in a huge humanistic movement. Instead of just accepting the flat two-dimensional assumptions about life, God, God, the planet, and the universe itself that the church peddled, they were challenging those assumptions. This led to a blossoming of new perceptions in every area of human endeavor: art, music, architecture, religion, science, philosophy, theater, and literature. Artists, composers, scientists, and writers looked back beyond the darkness of 14th centuries and took their inspiration from the humanist qualities in Greco-Roman culture. The Renaissance flowered right across Europe but had a different emphasis in the different European cultures. It was religion and philosophy in Germany, for example, art, architecture, and sculpture in Italy, and in England it was Elizabethan theater drama. All through the Middle Ages, English drama had been religious and didactic. When Elizabeth came to the throne, most of the plays on offer to the public were miracle plays presenting in crude dialogue stories, from the Bible and lives of the saints and the moralities which taught lessons for the guidance of a life through the means of allegorical action. They were primarily dramas about God, not about people. By the time Elizabeth's reign ended, there were over 20 theatres in London, all turning over several plays a week, plays that were secular in their nature and about people. That represented a complete revolution in theatre and makes Elizabethan theatre distinct. What changed at the time was that the theatre became a place where people went to see not dramatized lectures on good behavior but a reflection of their own spirit and day to day interests. They wanted to laugh and to cry, to be moved not by divine reflection but by human beings doing good and bad things just as they did, loving and murdering, stealing, cheating, acting sacrificially, getting into trouble, and behaving nobly, in short, being human like themselves. This was Elizabethan theatre scene attracted writers of great caliber who thought of themselves simply as craftsmen. in the same way as Cooper's or wheelwrights did, and not great writers as we think of them today. But even so, most of the theatre writers of Elizabethan England have not been equal during the 4 centuries since that time. There was a lot of money to be made feeding this huge new appetite for plays, and good playwrights who played their cards well and made good contacts, as Shakespeare did, became rich. So, when we look back at Elizabethan drama from the 21st century, what do we see? We see, for the first time, stage presentations of the human experience. We see acts of great nobility by flawed heroes, a great theme of Greek tragedy, perfected by Shakespeare in such plays as Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, etc. We see human beings at their meanest level. We see psychological studies of the human characters, such as the psychopathic Iago in Othello. We see the exploration of the deepest human emotions, such as love in Romeo and Juliet and Antony and Cleopatra. Although most of the plays of the Elizabethan period have an underlying Christian assumption because of the culture of the time in which they were they are essentially humanist, in tune with the Renaissance spirit of the time in Elizabethan drama, because it is about people rather than um, God. We see a lot of fear, lot of humor. Again, Again, modeled on the Greek comedies, the humor is perfected by the likes of Shakespeare and Ben Jonson, with their memorable comic characters and their satirical look at their own time, as well as light-hearted social comedies, light-hearted social comedies. In Shakespeare's plays, there is humor even in the darkest plays, such as the frequent laugh lines in Hamlet. Shakespeare more or less invented two forms of drama that mixed all genres, so that his tragedies contain comic elements, his comedies tragic elements, and his histories contain both. In Shakespeare's case, the winds of Renaissance gave him the freedom to reflect all aspects of human beings in his plays, and he wrote plays that have not only lasted for 400 years, but which have very rarely, if at all, been battered during that time. Towards the end of Elizabeth's reign, playwrights were developing new themes and techniques, which led to the distinctive Jacobean theatre with its more crusty, violent plays that focused on the human being's capacity for selfishness, dramatized in depth representations of ambition and its effects. Origins of Elizabethan drama. From the Elizabethan age come some of the most highly respected plays in Western drama, although it is generally agreed that the period began at the commencement of Queen Elizabeth I's reign in 1558, and the ending date is not definitive. Some consider the age to have ended at the Queen's death in 1603, while others place the end of Elizabethan drama at the closing of the theatres in 1642. Some of the most important playwrights come from the Elizabethan era, including Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, and Christopher Marlowe. These playwrights wrote plays that were patterned on numerous previous sources, including the Greek tragedy, Seneca's plays, Attic drama, Plautus, English miracle plays, a morality plays, and interludes. Elizabethan tragedy dealt with heroic themes, usually centering on great personality by his own passion and ambition. The comedies often satirized the fops and calends of society. So, authors and playwrights of this time: George Chapman, 1559 to 1634; Thomas Dekker, 1572 to 1632; Thomas Haywood, 1573 to 1641; Ben Jonson, 1572 to 1637; Thomas Kidd, 1558 to 1594; Christopher Marlowe, 1564 to 1593; William Shakespeare, 1564 to 1616. So, representative works of this time: Every Man in His Humor by Ben Jonson; Hamlet by Shakespeare. Some say Shakespeare's most well-loved play was first produced around 1600 with Richard Burbage, the leading actor in Shakespeare's company, in the title role. Title role. Now, next, The Jew of Malta. Christopher Marlowe's play of Machiavellian policy was first produced in 1592, though it is described on the title page of the 1633 edition as a tragedy. It is really a dark satirical comedy. The Spanish Tragedy, a Thomas Kidd's wildly successful play, propelled him into fame. The story deals with a father's desire to avenge his son's death. Tamburlaine the Great, Part 1 of Christopher Marlowe's time. The Great was produced around 1587. The play was so successful that Marlowe immediately wrote a sequel. Both parts were published in 1590. These were the only published works of Marlowe during his brief lifetime. The story is based upon the career of the Mongolian conqueror Timur the Lame, or Tamerlane, who overthrew the Turkish Empire in 1402. Tamburlaine is an ambitious character who overcomes all resistance through the use of both arms and rhetoric. Throughout the course of the play, he gains allies, conquers kings, and succeeds in winning the affection of the woman of his dreams. While the Elizabethan audiences appreciated the story of Tamburlaine, it was the poetry that really set this play apart from other plays. Previous drama had often been halting and didactic in its speech, but with this production, Marlowe took Elizabethan drama to a higher level of eloquence and sophistication. As R.C. Belt notes in his introduction to his Elizabethan plays, before his time, dramatic verse had usually been rhymed, but Marlowe's sense of style gave the new measure a strength and dignity previously lacking in dramatic verse. Miracle and morality plays. Second Shepherd's play. Let us review comic situations, disguise, hidden identity, and what else? What is comic tension? How does this comedy about a nativity scene evolve into a religious nativity scene? Deus ex machina. This is a very important term for drama, or especially tragedy. Deus ex machina, with the angel. When Jill creates the idea of disguise, how do we appreciate her as a comic character? What makes this a good example of characterization? Everyman. Everyman says, what is the core emotional power in that last page of the play? Pages of the play? Intellectual themes, humanism, rediscovered classical literature was centered on the individual, worldly, earthly power, power we have and power that affects us. Neoplatonic search for earthly perfection, ideal of courtier, definitely not chivalric knight. Some motives: anti-Semitism, disguise, humors, revenge, the supernatural, style, asides, blank verse, dramatic irony. So, do you remember this term from your early experience? How does Shakespeare use his dramatic tool in comedy and tragedy? Iambic pentameter, insults, puns, rhymed couplets, scenery and setting, soliloquy, violence, and historical context, master of reveals and censorship, Puritans, plague, royal patronage, Machiavelli, Protestantism. The last, the first English plays written and performed in the 14th century told religious stories and took place in churches. In the following 2 centuries, under the influence of the Renaissance, the topics and performance of plays changed. It is the period marking the transition from the medieval to the modern world. Renaissance plays no longer dealt with religious subjects. In London, in the 1570s, the first institutionalized public playhouses, the Rose and the Theater, were built. Shakespeare, together with some actors, uh, Shakespeare, together with some actors, had a playhouse built on the south bank of the Thames, the Globe Theatre, very important theatre of that time, which opened in 1599. The Elizabethan Theater was a public place open to people of all social classes because everybody could afford the price for standing room. Consequently, the play had to meet the expectations of all classes. Early plays. The first English plays were the medieval miracle plays or mystery plays. They told religious stories and were performed in open places or in the churches or the stage wagons. Other early plays were called morality plays. Their characters were allegorical types representing virtues, beauty, strength, chastity, good deeds, etc. Their characters were allegorical types. Its theme is the summoning of every man by death. Every man finds out that none of his friends but good deeds are willing to accompany him. After this, the interludes were created, which were performed at court or at rich men's houses or gardens. Like the moralities, the interludes had allegorical characters. The new elements that were added were rough humor and comic relief. In the late 16th century, chronicle plays became widely popular for their stage battles and impressive pageantry. They were based on the historical material of Raphael Holinshed's Chronicles 1577 and consisted of a loosely knit series of events during the reign of an English monarch. There was a rising interest in the English past due to the English defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588. Christopher Marlowe in his Edward II, 1592, and William Shakespeare in his history plays shaped the historical material into a unified drama centering around the individual characters. During the Elizabethan age, during the Elizabethan age, tragedy and comedy developed. The Renaissance gave rise to a growing interest in man as presented in classical Greek and Latin drama, which had examples of both comedy and tragedy. It is the period it is the period marking it is the period It is the period marking the transition from the medieval to the modern world. Renaissance plays no longer dealt with religious subjects. The first great dramatist before Shakespeare to turn away from the allegorical types as characters and to focus on the individual was Christopher Marlowe. His tragedies, Tamburlaine the Great and the Jew of Malta, are full of violence. They deal with the ambition and the struggle for power. So does the tragical history of the life and death of Dr. Faustus, published in 1604. It is based on the well known story of a man who sold his soul to the devil in order to gain power and wealth in his life. The Elizabethan dramatist who added psychological insight and mastery of the plot to Marlowe's accomplishment was William Shakespeare, who wrote more than 30 plays. Most famous are the tragedies Romeo and Juliet, published in 1594 to 95, Julius Caesar from 1598 to 1600, Hamlet 1600 to 1601, Othello 1604 to 1605, King Lear and Macbeth 1605 to 1606, and his comedies A Midsummer Night's Dream 1595 to 96, Measure for Measure 1604 to 5. The performance of plays. Religious medieval plays were either performed inside or near churches. If the traveling players performed in the open stage, wagons were used as stages. These stages were open to all sides. In Shakespeare's time, performances were given in yards. Two stage wagons were pushed together, forming a stage. In London in the 1570s, the first institutionalized public playhouses, the Rose and the Theater, were built. Shakespeare, together with some actors, had a playhouse built on the south bank of Thames, the Globe Theatre, which opened in 1599. The Globe Theatre was a three-tiered building consisting of galleries surrounding an open-air courtyard. The galleries had a thatched roof which was a thatched roof, which was probably the reason why the globe burned down so soon in 1613. Just a minute. Two-thirds of the audience sat on backless wooden benches, whilst the groundlings stood in the pit around the stage. The platform stage, which protruded into the audience, was visible from three sides. There was neither artificial lighting or sound amplification or any stage scenery. The actors entered the stage from their dressing room, which was underneath the stage. The costumes were seldom historically accurate, as the Elizabethan plays originally did not have any division into acts or scenes. A rhyming couplet communicated the end of the scene and the change of the scenery to the actors and the audience. Because of the open platform stage, the contact between the audience and the actors was close. Monologues and asides. Aside means speech meant to be heard by the audience only, not by the characters present on the stage, could be directly addressed to the spectators. The closeness between the actors and the spectators forced the actors to arrest the audience's interest and to carry them away in the most moving scenes. If the actors failed to establish contact with the audience, the performance could end up in uproar. The Elizabethan Theater was public place open to people of all social classes because everybody could afford the price for standing room. Consequently, the play had to meet the expectations of all classes, of the educated citizens or noblemen as well as of the illiterate groundlings. The playhouse and the players' companies of professional actors were run by shareholding companies. The dramatist sold his play to a company and was paid by the day according to the play's popularity. The Puritan reaction of the 17th century put an end to the Elizabethan theatre, the popularity of which has never again been repeated. English Renaissance Theatre, also known as Renaissance English Theatre and Elizabethan Theatre, refers to the theatre of England between 1562 and 1642. This is the style of the plays of William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Ben Jonson. The term English Renaissance Theatre encompasses the period between 1562, following a performance of Gorboduc, the first English play using blank verse, at the Inner Temple during the Christmas season of 1561, and the ban on theatrical plays enacted by English Parliament in 1642. The phrases Elizabethan theatre is sometimes used improperly to mean English Renaissance theatre, although in a strict sense Elizabethan only refers to the period of Queen Elizabeth's reign, extending from 1558 to 1603. English Renaissance theatre may be said to encompass Elizabethan theatre from 1562 to 1603, Jacobean theatre from 1603 to 1625, and Caroline theatre from 1625 to 1642. Along with the economics of the profession, the character of the drama changed towards the end of the period. Under Elizabeth, the drama was a unified expression as far as social class was concerned. The court watched the same plays the commoners saw in the public playhouses. With the development of the private theatre, drama became more oriented towards the tastes and values of an upper class audience. By the late part of the reign of Charles the First, few new plays were being written for the public theatres, which sustained themselves on the accumulated works of the previous decades. Grammar schools. The English grammar schools, like those on the continent, placed a special emphasis on the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Though rhetorical instruction was intended as preparation as preparation for careers in civil service such as law, the rhetorical canons of memory, memoria, and delivery, pronunciatio, uh, taught theatrical skills. Students would typically analyze Latin and Greek texts, write their own compositions, memorize them, and then perform them in front of their instructor and their peers. Records show that in addition to this weekly performance, students would perform plays on holidays and in both Latin and in English. Choir schools. Choir schools connected with the Elizabethan court included St. George's Chapel, the Chapel Royal, and St. Paul's. These schools were performed plays and other court entertainments for the Queen between the 1560s and 1570s. These schools had begun to perform for general audiences as well. Playing companies of boy actors were derived from choir schools. An earlier example of a playwright contracted to write for the children's companies is John Lilly, who wrote Galatea, Endymion, and Midas for Paul's Boys. Another example is Ben Jonson, who wrote Cynthia's Revels. Universities. Academic drama. Academic drama stems from late medieval and early modern practices of miracles and morality plays, as well as the Feast of Fools and the election of a Lord Misrule. The Feast of Fools includes a mummer plays. The universities, particularly Oxford and Cambridge, were attended by students studying for bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, followed by doctorates in law, medicine, and theology. In the 1400s, dramas were often restricted in mummer plays, with someone who read out all the parts in Latin. With the rediscovery and redistribution of classical materials during the English Renaissance, Latin and Greek plays began to be restaged. These plays were often accompanied by feasts. Queen Elizabeth I viewed dramas during her visits to Oxford and Cambridge. A well-known play cycle which was written and performed in the universities uh, uh, was the Parnassus was the Parnassus plays. Gorboduc, TP 1565. Upon graduation, many universities students, especially those going into law, would reside and participate in the Inns of Court. The Inns of Court were communities of working lawyers and university alumni. Notable literary figures and playwrights who resided in the Inns of Court include John Donne, Francis Beaumont, John Marston, Thomas Lodge, Thomas Campion, Abraham France, Sir Philip Sidney, Sir Thomas More, Sir Francis Bacon, and George Gascoigne. Like the university, the Inns of Court elected their own Lord of Misrule. Other activities included participation in moot court, disputation, and masques. Plays written and performed in the Inns of Court include Gorboduc, Gismund of Salern, and the Misfortunes of Arthur. An example of a famous mask put on by the Inns was James Shirley's The Triumph of Peace. Shakespeare's The Comedy of Errors and Twelfth Night were also performed here. although written for commercial theatre. Masks. Establishment of playhouses. The first permanent English theatre, the Red Lion, opened in 1567, but it was a short lived failure. The first successful theatres, such as the theatre, opened in 1576. The establishment of large and profitable public theatres was an essential enabling factor in the success of English Renaissance drama. Once they were in operation, drama could become a fixed and permanent rather than transitory phenomenon. Their construction was prompted when the Mayor and Corporation of London first banned plays in 1572 as a measure against the plague, and then formally expelled all players from the city in 1575. This prompted the construction of permanent playhouses outside the jurisdiction of London, in the liberties of Holywell, in Shoreditch, and later the Clink, and at Newington Butts, near the established entertainment district of St. George's Fields in rural Surrey. The theatre was constructed in Shoreditch in 1576 by James Burbage and his brother-in-law John Bryan. The owner of the unsuccessful Red Lion Playhouse of 1567, and the Newington Butts Playhouse was set up probably by Jerome Savage sometime between 1575 and 1577. The theatre was rapidly followed by the nearby Curtain Theatre, 1577, and the Rose, 1587, the Swan, 1595, the Globe, 1599, the Fortune, 1600, and the Red Bull, 1604. Archaeological excavations on the foundations of the Rose and the Globe in the late 20th century showed that all the London theatres had individual differences, but their common function necessitated a similar general plan. The public theatres were 3 stories high and built around an open space at the theatre, usually polygonal in plan to give an overall rounded effect, although the Red Bull and the First Fortune were square. The 3 levels of inward facing galleries overlooked the open center, into which jutted the stage, essentially a platform surrounded on 3 sides by the audience. The rear side was restricted for the entrances and exits of the actors and seating for the musicians. The upper level behind the stage could be used as a balcony, as in Romeo and Juliet and Antony and Cleopatra, or as a position from which an actor could harangue a crowd, as in Julius Caesar. The playhouses were generally built with timber and plaster. Individual theatre descriptions give additional information about their construction, such as flint stones being used to build the swan theatres were also constructed to be able to hold a large number of people. A different model was developed with the Blackfriars Theatre, which came into regular use on a long-term basis in 1599. The Blackfriars was small in comparison to the earlier theatres and roofed rather than open to the sky. It resembled a modern theatre in ways that its predecessors did not. Other small enclosed theatres followed, notably the White Friar 1608 and the Cockpit 1617. With the building of the Salisbury Court Theatre in 1629 near the site of the defunct White Friars, The London audience had six theatres to choose from: three surviving large open air public theatres, the Globe, the Fortune, and the Red Bull, and three smaller enclosed private theatres, the Blackfriars, the Cockpit, and the Salisbury Court. Audiences of the 1630s benefited from a half century of vigorous dramaturgical development. The plays of Marlowe and Shakespeare and their contemporaries were still being performed on a regular basis, mostly at the public theatres, while the newest works of the newest playwrights were abandoned as well, mainly at the private theatres. Audiences around 1580, when both the theatre and the curtain were all on a summer days, the total theatre capacity of London was about 5,000 spectators. With the building of new theatre facilities and the formation of new companies, London's total theatre capacity exceeded 10,000 after 1610. Ticket prices in general varied during this time period. The cost of admission was based on where in the theatre at a person wished to be situated, or based on what a person could afford. If people wanted to better view of the stage or to be more separate from the crowd, they would pay more for their entrance. Due to inflation, uh, that occurred during this time period, admission increased in some theatres from a penny to a sixpence or even higher. Commercial theatres were largely located just outside the boundaries of the City of London, since city authorities tended to be wary of the adult playing companies, but plays were performed by touring companies all over England. English companies even toured the performed English plays abroad, especially in Germany and in Denmark. Performances. The acting companies functioned on a repertory system, unlike modern productions that can run for months or years or end. The troops of this era rarely acted the same play 2 days in a row. Thomas Middleton's A Game at Chess ran for nine straight performances in August 1624 before it was closed by the authorities, but this was due to the political content of the play and was a unique, unprecedented, and unrepeatable phenomenon. The 1592 season of Lord Strange's Men at the Rose Theatre was far more representative. Between 19 February and 23 June, the company played 6 days a week, minus Good Friday and two other days. They performed 23 different plays, some only once, and their most popular play of the season. The first part of Hieronimo, based on Keats' The Spanish Tragedy, 15 times. They never played the same play 2 days in a row, and rarely the same play twice in a week. Our distinctive feature of the companies was that they included only males. Female parts were played by adolescent boy players in women's costume. Some companies were composed entirely of boy players. Performances in the public theatres like the Globe took place in the afternoon with no artificial lighting, but when in the course of a play the light began to fade, sorry. In the course of play, the light began to fade, candles were lit, In the enclosed private theatres like the Blackfriars, artificial lighting was used throughout. Plays contained little to no scenery, as the scenery was described by the actors or indicated by customs through the course of the play. In the Elizabethan era, research has been conclusive about how many actors and troops there were in the 16th century, but little research delves into the roles of the actors on the English Renaissance stage. The actors were all male. In fact, most were boys. For plays written that had male and female parts, the female parts were played by the youngest boy players. In Elizabethan entertainment, troupes were created and they were considered the actor companies. They traveled around England as drama was the most entertaining art at that time. As a boy player, many skills had to be implemented, such as voice and aestheticism. Fencing was one. Stronger female roles in tragedies were acted by older boy players because they had the experience. Elizabethan actors never played the same show on successive days and added new play to their repertoire every other week. These actors were getting paid within these troupes. So far, their job, they would constantly learn new plays as they toured different cities in England. In these plays, there were bookkeepers that acted as the narrators of these plays, and they would introduce the actors and the different roles they played. At some points, the bookkeeper, Sutradhar, in Sanskrit drama, this is called Sutradhar. At some points, the bookkeeper wouldn't state the narrative of the scene, so the audience could find out for themselves. In Elizabethan and Jacobean plays, the plays often exceeded the murder of characters' roles and did not have enough actors to fulfill them. Thus, the idea of doubling roles came to be. Doubling roles is used to reinforce a play's theme by having the actor act out the different roles simultaneously. The reason for this was for the acting companies to control salary costs or to be able to perform under conditions where resources and such as other actor companies lending actors were not present. There are two acting styles implemented: formal and natural. Formal acting is objective and traditional. Natural acting attempts to create an illusion for the audience by remaining in character and imitating the fictional circumstances. The formal actor symbolizes while the natural actor interprets. The natural actor impersonates while the formal actor represents the role. Natural and formal are opposites of each other, where natural acting is subjective. Overall, the use of these acting styles and the doubled roles dramatic device made Elizabethan plays very popular. Double role, double role. Ram and Sham, Sita or Gita in Hindi, Angur by Gulzar, and Two Gentle Two Gentlemen of Verona by Shakespeare. Costumes of the Elizabethan era. One of the main uses of costume during the Elizabethan era was to make up for the lack of scenery, set, and props on a stage. It created a visual effect for the audience, and it was an integral part of the overall performance. since the main visual appeal on a stage was the costumes. They were often bright in color and visually impressive. Colors symbolized social hierarchy, and customs were made to reflect that. For example, if a character was a royalty, their custom would include purple. The colors as well as the different fabrics of costumes allowed the audience to know the status of each character when they first appeared on the stage. Costumes were collected in inventory. More often than not, costumes would not be made individually to fit the actor. Instead, they would be selected out of the stock that theater companies would keep. A theater company reused costumes when possible and would rarely get new costumes made. Costumes themselves were expensive, so usually players wore contemporary clothing regardless of the time period of the play. The most expensive pieces were given to higher class characters because costuming was used to identify social status on stage. The the fabrics within a playhouse would indicate the wealth of the company itself. The fabrics used the most were velvet, satin, silk, cloth of gold, lace, and ermine. For less significant characters, actors would use their own cloths. Actors who left cloths in their will for following actors to use. Masters would also leave cloths for servants in their will, but servants were not allowed to wear fancy clothing. Instead, they sold the clothes back to theater companies. In the Elizabethan era, there was a law stating that certain classes could only wear clothing fitting of their status in society. There was a discrimination of status within the classes. Higher classes flaunted their wealth and power through the appearance of clothing. However, actors were the only exception. If actors belonged to a licensed acting company, they were allowed to dress above their standing in society for specific roles in a production. The growing population of London, the growing wealth of its people, and their fondness for spectacle produced a dramatic literature of remarkable variety, quality, and extent. Although most of the plays written for the Elizabethan stage have been lost, over 1600 remain. The people who wrote these plays were primarily self made men from modest backgrounds. Some of them were educated at either Oxford or Cambridge, but many were not. Although William Shakespeare and Ben Jonson were actors, the majority do not seem to have been performers, and no major author who came onto the scene after 1600 is known to have supplemented his income by acting. Their lives were subject to the same levels of danger and earlier mortality, as all who lived during the early modern period. Christopher Marlowe was killed in an apparent tavern brawl, while Ben Jonson killed an actor in a duel. Several were probably soldiers. Playwrights were normally paid in increments during the writing process, and if their play was accepted, they would also receive the proceeds from one day's performance. However, they had to owe ownership of the plays they wrote. Once a play was sold to a company, the company owned it, and the playwright had no control over casting, performance, revision, or or publication. The profession of dramatist was challenging and far from lucrative. Entries in Philip Henslow's diary show that in the year around 1600, Henslow paid as little as £6 or pound per play. This was probably at the low end of the range, though even the best writers could not demand too much more. A playwright working alone could generally produce two plays a year at most. In the 1630s, Richard Brome signed a contract with Salisbury Court Theatre to supply three plays a year, but found himself unable to meet the workload. Shakespeare produced fewer than 40 solo plays in a career that spanned more than decades. He was financially successful because he was an actor and, most importantly, a shareholder in the company for which he acted and in the theatres they used. Ben Jonson achieved success as a purveyor of court masks and was talented at playing the patronage game that was an important part of the social and economic life of the era. Those who those who were playwrights fared far less well. The biographies of early figures like George Peele and Robert Greene, and later ones like Brome and Philip Messenger, are marked by financial uncertainty, struggle, and poverty. Genres of the period included the history play, which depicted English or European history. Shakespeare's plays about the lives of kings such as Richard III and Henry IV belong to this category, as do Christopher Marlowe's Edward II and George Peele's famous Chronicle of King Edward I. History plays also dealt with the more recent events like Larum for London, which dramatizes the sack of Antwerp in 1576. A better known play, Peele's The Battle of Alcazar, depicts the Battle of Alcazar Quiber in 1578. Tragedy was a very popular genre. Marlowe's tragedies were exceptionally successful, such as Dr. Faustus and the Jew of Malta. Comedies were common too. Comedy, it was also common. A subgenre developed in this period was the city comedy, which deals with satirically with life in London after the fashion of Roman New Comedy. Examples are Thomas Decker's The Shoemaker's Holiday and Thomas Middleton's A Chest Made in Cheapside. Though marginalized, the older genres like pastoral, the faithful shepherdess, 1608, and even the morality plays, four plays in one, in 1608 to 13, could exert influences after about 1610. The new hybrid subgenre of the tragicomedy enjoyed an efflorescence, as did the masque throughout the reigns of the first two Stuart kings, James I and Charles I. Plays on biblical themes were common, but Peele's David and Bathsheba is one of the few surviving examples. The rising Puritan movement was hostile toward theatre, as they felt the entertainment was sinful. Politically, playwrights and actors were clients of the monarchy and the aristocracy, and most supported the royalist cause. The Puritan faction, long powerful in London, gained control of the city early in the first English Civil War on 2nd of September 1642. Whereas the distressed state of Ireland, steeped in her own blood, and the distracted state of England, threatened with a cloud of blood by a civil war, called for a possible means to appease and avert the wrath of God, appearing in these judgments, among which fasting and prayer, having been often tried to be very effectual, having been lately and are still enjoined. Even after 1642, During the English Civil War and the ensuing interregnum English Commonwealth, some English Renaissance theatre continued. For example, short comical plays called drolls were allowed by the authorities, while full-length plays were banned. The theatre buildings were not closed, but rather were used for purposes and other staging plays. The performance of plays remained banned for most of the next 18 years, becoming allowed again after the restoration of the monarchy in 1660. The theatres began performing many of the plays of the previous era, though often in adapted forms. New genres of restoration comedy and spectacle soon evolved, giving English theatre of the later 17th century and its distinctive character. The influence of the ancients on English drama is a coeval with the drama itself, but whether in theme, treatment, or style, classical influences were filtered through many foreign channels, imbibing on the way qualities of each and even least so affected, limited, and confined in tragedy to one Latin and one Greek dramatist. So, this way, I have completed my lecture. My lecture is over, dear students, and thank you. Thanks to all of you. Thanks to all of you that you have very patiently heard my lecture, listened to my lecture for complete an hour. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.